The gunshot still echoed in her dreams 3 years later, but it was the sudden movements that made her body betray her in daylight. Julia Voss stood behind the counter of the White Pine Mercantile, her fingers trembling as she wrapped brown paper around a pound of coffee beans. When the door swung open with such force that she dropped everything and stepped back against the shelves, her arms instinctively rising to protect her face. Isaac Daugherty froze in the doorway, his hand still raised from pushing the door, and watched the young woman's reaction with a sinking feeling in his chest. He had been in White Pine, Nevada for only 2 weeks in this summer of 1882, working at the Connolly Ranch 5 miles outside town, but he had noticed Julia Voss the first time he walked into the mercantile. She had pale blue eyes that reminded him of winter sky, auburn hair she kept in a practical bun, and a way of moving through the world like she was trying not to take up too much space. Now, those blue eyes were wide with fear, and her whole body had gone rigid. "Madam," Isaac said quietly, lowering his hand very slowly. "I apologize. I did not mean to startle you." Julia's arms came down gradually and color flooded back into her cheeks. "No, I'm sorry. The wind must have caught the door." But they both knew there was no wind that day. The Nevada heat hung heavy and still over the town, making even the horses stand motionless in their hitches. Isaac stepped inside with deliberate slowness, keeping his movements smooth and predictable. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of strong coffee. At 26, he had worked ranches from Montana to Texas, but he had never seen fear quite like what he just witnessed in Julia's face. "I need some supplies," he said, his voice pitched low and easy. "Tobacco, if you have it, and maybe some peppermints." Julia nodded and turned to the shelves behind her, her movements quick and efficient. Isaac noticed how she kept him in her peripheral vision, never quite turning her back completely. When she set the items on the counter, she made sure to place them where he could reach them without coming too close to her. "That will be 35 cents, she said. Isaac reached into his pocket slowly, watching her face. Even that small movement made her tense slightly. He placed the coins on the counter rather than handing them to her directly, and he saw something shift in her expression. Not quite gratitude, but maybe recognition that he understood something unspoken. "Thank you, madam," he said, gathering his purchases. This time, he opened the door carefully, controlling its swing, and closed it gently behind him. Outside, he stood on the wooden sidewalk and looked down the dusty main street of White Pine. The town had sprung up around the mining operations that dotted the high desert valleys of eastern Nevada, though by 1882 the boom was settling into something more permanent. There were 2 saloons, a hotel, a blacksmith, the mercantile, a small church, and about 30 other buildings spread along the main road and the side streets. The mountains rose in the distance, sage-covered and ancient, and the air smelled of dust and pine from the trees that gave the town its name. Isaac had come to Nevada following work, as he always did. The Connolly Ranch ran cattle in the valleys and needed experienced hands. The work was hard but honest, and Isaac had learned long ago that staying in motion kept him from thinking too much about the life he had left behind in Missouri. But something about Julia Voss had lodged in his mind like a splinter, and he found himself thinking about her fear and what might have caused it. That evening at the ranch, Isaac sat with the other hands around the bunkhouse after supper. Most of the men were playing cards or mending tack, but old Pete Morrison sat on his bunk whittling a piece of pine. Pete had been in White Pine for 15 years and knew everyone's story. "Pete," Isaac said, keeping his voice casual, "the woman who runs the mercantile, Miss Voss. She always worked there, Pete's knife paused in its carving. "Julia's been running that place about 3 years now, since her father died. She seems nervous. She has reason to be." Pete set down his whittling and met Isaac's eyes. "Her father, Samuel Voss, he was a good man. Ran that store fair and honest. But Julia was engaged to a man named Martin Slade. He worked at one of the mines, seemed respectable enough. But he had a temper that he kept hidden until after they were engaged. He started showing up at the store, making scenes, grabbing her rough when he thought no one was looking." Isaac's jaw tightened. "What happened?" "Samuel saw bruises on Julia's arms one day and confronted Slade. Told him the engagement was off and he was not to come near his daughter again. Slade left town, or so everyone thought. But he came back one night, drunk and angry, broke into their home above the store. Samuel heard him coming up the stairs and met him with a rifle. There was a struggle." Pete's voice grew quiet. "Samuel was shot with his own gun. Julia saw the whole thing." The bunkhouse had gone silent. Every man there understood violence, but violence against family was something different. "Where's Slade now?" Isaac asked. "Dead. The sheriff shot him when he tried to run, but the damage was done. Julia saw her father murdered right in front of her. She took over the store because she had to, but everyone in town knows she jumps at shadows. Some folks are patient with her. Others think she should just move on." Isaac thought about that as he lay in his bunk that night, listening to the other men snore and shift in their sleep. He thought about how Julia had flinched when he raised his hand, how she had positioned items on the counter to maintain distance, how she had kept him in her line of sight. She was not just nervous. She was living with a terror that had roots deep in her memory. The next time Isaac went to town, 3 days later, he approached the mercantile differently. He made sure his boots made noise on the wooden sidewalk so she would hear him coming. He opened the door slowly and stepped inside without any sudden movements. Julia was arranging canned goods on a shelf. When she turned and saw him, he raised his hand very slowly in greeting, giving her time to see it was just a wave. She did not flinch this time, though her body still went tense. "Afternoon, Miss Voss," Isaac said. "I hope you are well today." "I'm well enough, Mr. Daugherty." She had learned his name then. "What can I get for you? I need some flour and sugar, and maybe some dried apples if you have them." She gathered the items with practiced efficiency, and Isaac noticed she seemed slightly less nervous than before. He made sure to move slowly as he counted out his money, and when he placed it on the counter, he said, "You run a good store here. Everything's well organized." It was a simple compliment, but he saw color touch her cheeks. "Thank you. My father taught me to keep good inventory." "He taught you well." As Isaac left the store, he felt her watching him go. It was a start. Over the following weeks, Isaac found reasons to come to town more often than necessary. He never showed up without warning, always made noise approaching the store, and moved around Julia like she was a half-wild horse that needed gentle handling. He learned to telegraph his movements, to speak before reaching for anything, to give her space and time to adjust to his presence. Gradually, Julia began to relax around him. She stopped positioning herself near the back door when he came in. She turned her back to reach high shelves. She even smiled once when he made a joke about the weather. One afternoon in late August, Isaac entered the store to find Julia struggling with a heavy crate that had been delivered. She was trying to drag it across the floor, her face flushed with effort. "May I help?" Isaac asked from the doorway. Julia straightened, breathing hard. For a moment he thought she would refuse, but then she nodded. "It needs to go behind the counter." Isaac moved forward slowly, giving her time to step back. He lifted the crate easily and carried it where she indicated. When he set it down, he noticed Julia had not retreated to the far side of the room. She was standing just a few feet away, watching him with something other than fear in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I could have managed, but it would have taken considerably longer." "I do not doubt you could have managed, Miss Voss. You seem like someone who manages most things on your own." Something flickered in her expression. "I have had to learn how." Isaac wanted to tell her he knew about her father, about Martin Slade, about everything. But he sensed that would be a violation of the trust she was slowly beginning to extend. Instead, he said, "Independence is admirable, but accepting help now and then does not make you weak." Julia studied him for a long moment. "You move differently than most men." "How so?" Carefully. "Like you understand that sudden movements can be frightening." Isaac leaned against the counter, keeping his posture relaxed and open. "I worked with horses for years before I worked with cattle. You learn quickly that the frightened ones need patience, not force. They need to know you are not going to hurt them." "I am not a horse, Mr. Daugherty." "No, madam, you are not. But you are someone who has been hurt, and I reckon you deserve the same patience and respect I would give any creature that has learned to be wary." Julia's eyes filled with sudden tears, and she turned away quickly. "I should finish unpacking this delivery." Isaac straightened and moved toward the door. "I will see you next time I am in town, Miss Voss." "Mr. Daugherty." Her voice stopped him at the threshold. "You can call me Julia." He turned and met her eyes. "Then you should call me Isaac." "All right." "Isaac." The way she said his name, soft and careful, stayed with him all the way back to the ranch. September brought cooler weather to the high desert, and with it came preparations for winter. Isaac helped the Connolly outfit move cattle to lower pastures and repair buildings against the coming cold. But he still found time to visit White Pine, and increasingly his visits to the mercantile lasted longer. He and Julia talked while she worked. Conversations that started with the weather and the state of the roads and gradually deepened into something more personal. Julia told him about growing up in the store, learning arithmetic by counting inventory and reading by studying labels and catalogs. She told him about her mother, who had died of pneumonia when Julia was 12, and how her father had raised her alone after that, teaching her everything he knew about business and integrity. Isaac told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, the youngest of 5 children. He told her about leaving home at 18 to see the West, about the ranches and towns and people he had known in his years of wandering. He did not tell her. He was running from the memory of a girl he had almost married who had chosen his older brother instead, because that pain had faded to insignificance compared to what Julia had endured. One afternoon in early October, Isaac arrived at the mercantile to find Julia locking the door, a basket over her arm. "Am I too late?" he asked. "No, I was just going to take a walk. The store gets stuffy sometimes." She hesitated, then added, "You could walk with me if you like." It was the first time she had invited his company. Isaac fell into step beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. They walked down the main street and then onto a path that led toward the edge of town, where the desert opened up in gold and sage-green waves toward the mountains. "This is my favorite time of year," Julia said. "The heat breaks, but winter has not come yet. Everything feels possible." "What would you do if anything were possible?" Julia was quiet for a while, watching a hawk circle overhead. "I would stop being afraid. I would stop flinching at shadows and sudden noises. I would stop sleeping with a rifle beside my bed and checking the locks 3 times before going to sleep." She glanced at Isaac. "I would feel safe." "You deserve to feel safe, Julia. Deserving something and having it are different things." They walked in silence until they reached a large, flat rock that overlooked the valley. Julia sat down, arranging her skirts, and after a moment Isaac sat beside her, leaving space between them. "Can I tell you something?" Julia asked. "Anything." "When you first came into the store and I flinched, I was so ashamed. I hate that I react that way. I hate that he still has that power over me, even though he is dead." "It is not about power," Isaac said. "It is about memory. Your body remembers being hurt and it is trying to protect you. There is no shame in that. Does it ever stop? The fear?" Isaac thought about that carefully. "I think it changes. I think with time and with people who prove themselves trustworthy, it becomes smaller. It stops controlling you, but forgetting completely. I do not know if that happens." "You are the first person who has not told me I should just be over it by now. Then those people are fools." Isaac's voice held an edge of anger. "You watched your father die. You were hurt by someone who was supposed to love you. Those things do not just disappear because time passes." Julia turned to look at him fully. "Why are you so patient with me?" "Because you are worth the patience. Because I think beneath all that fear is someone remarkable who deserves the chance to feel safe again." Isaac met her eyes. "And because I find myself caring about you more than I probably should." The confession hung in the air between them. Julia's breath caught, and for a moment Isaac thought he had ruined everything by speaking too soon. But then she said, very quietly, "I care about you too." "It terrifies me, but I do." "Why does it terrify you?" "Because the last time I cared about someone, he hurt me. Because trusting someone means giving them the power to destroy you." Isaac wanted to reach for her hand but kept his own hand still. "I cannot promise that I will never hurt you accidentally. I am human and flawed. But I can promise that I will never raise my hand to you in anger. I will never use my strength to frighten you. And I will never, ever make you feel like you are not safe with me." Tears spilled down Julia's cheeks. "How can you promise that?" "Because I watched my own father raise his hand to my mother once, just once, when I was 10 years old. I watched her flinch exactly the way you flinched that first day. And I watched my father break down and cry because he had scared the woman he loved. He never did it again, and he spent the rest of his life making sure she knew she was safe. He taught all his sons that a man who uses his strength against someone weaker is not a man at all." Isaac's voice was steady and sure. "That lesson took root in me. It is part of who I am." Julia wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I want to trust you. I want to believe what you are saying." "Then give me the chance to prove it. No rushing, no pressure, just time." Julia nodded slowly. "Time, I can try that." As they walked back to town, their hands brushed once, and Julia did not pull away. The weeks that followed brought a shift in their relationship that was both subtle and profound. Isaac continued to move carefully around Julia, but she began to move toward him in small ways. She stood closer when they talked. She laughed more easily at his stories. She began to save special items for him when they came in with deliveries, things she thought he might like. In late October, White Pine held a harvest dance in the community hall beside the church. Isaac had not planned to go until Pete Morrison mentioned that Julia had been convinced by the preacher's wife to attend. Isaac spent an embarrassing amount of time making himself presentable that evening. He washed thoroughly, shaved carefully, and put on his best shirt and vest. When he arrived at the hall, it was already crowded with townspeople and ranch families from the surrounding area. A fiddle and guitar provided music while couples danced and children ran between the adults. He found Julia standing near the refreshment table, wearing a dress of deep green that made her eyes luminous. Her hair was arranged differently, softer around her face, and she looked beautiful in a way that made Isaac's heart stammer. When she saw him, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Isaac, I was not sure you would come." "I almost did not. I am not much of a dancer." "Neither am I," Julia smiled. "We can be awkward together." But when Isaac extended his hand, slowly and with clear intention, Julia only hesitated a moment before placing her hand in his. Her fingers were small and warm in his palm, and Isaac held them gently as he led her to where other couples were dancing. He kept his other hand light on her waist, maintaining space between them, moving slowly through the simple steps of the dance. He could feel tension in Julia's body at first, but gradually she relaxed. By the end of the first song, she was actually following his lead, and by the second song, she was smiling. "You lied," Julia said as they turned through the steps. "You are a perfectly adequate dancer." My mother insisted all her sons learn. She said a man who could not dance was only half civilized. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. She died 2 years ago. Heart gave out one night in her sleep. Julia's expression softened with sympathy. "I am sorry." "It is hard to lose a parent, it is, but I am grateful she did not suffer." Isaac guided her through a turn. "She would have liked you." "Why do you say that?" "Because she admired strong women. Women who could run a business, stand on their own feet, survive hardship. She was one herself." They danced until Julia's feet hurt and Isaac's shirt was damp with sweat from the warmth of the crowded hall. They stepped outside to cool off, finding a quiet spot away from the noise and light. The October night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky in vast profusion. Julia wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and looked up at the heavens. "My father used to say the stars were souls of good people watching over us," she said. "I used to think it was just a pretty story, but now I hope it is true. I hope he can see that I am managing the store well, that I have not let it fall apart." "I am certain he can see that," Isaac said, "and I am certain he is proud of you." Julia turned to him. "I have not felt this happy in 3 years, not since before everything happened, and it frightens me because I keep waiting for something to ruin it." "Nothing is going to ruin it. You cannot know that. You are right. I cannot promise that life will not bring hardship, but I can promise that whatever comes, you will not face it alone, not if you do not want to." Julia moved closer, closing the distance between them in a way that felt momentous. "Isaac, I think I am falling in love with you, and I do not know what to do with that feeling because I thought I would never feel this way again." Isaac's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "I am already in love with you, Julia. I have been for weeks now, and I know you are scared, but I am asking you to take a chance on me. On us." For a moment, Julia just looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, she reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers soft against his skin. It was the first time she had initiated touch, and the trust it represented made Isaac's throat tight. "I want to try," she whispered. "I want to believe in this." Isaac covered her hand with his own, holding it gently against his face. "Then we will try together." When he kissed her, it was soft and careful, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Julia leaned into the kiss instead, her free hand coming up to rest on his chest, over his heart. The kiss was sweet and full of promise, and when they finally drew apart, Julia was crying and smiling at the same time. "That was my first kiss that did not feel like something being taken from me," she said. "That felt like something I chose." Isaac brushed away her tears with his thumb. "Every kiss, every touch, every moment between us will always be your choice. Always." They stayed outside for a long time, standing close together under the stars, talking about everything and nothing. And for the first time since her father's death, Julia felt like the future might hold something besides fear and loneliness. Winter came to White Pine with snow that transformed the high desert into something otherworldly and beautiful. Isaac continued working at the Connolly Ranch, but he spent more time in town, often helping Julia with heavy work at the mercantile. She no longer flinched when he reached for things or moved suddenly. She had learned the rhythm of his movements, the gentleness that underlay his strength. In December, a blizzard struck that closed the roads and trapped everyone in place for 3 days. Isaac had been in town when the storm hit, and Julia insisted he stay in the small apartment above the mercantile rather than try to ride back to the ranch. "You can sleep on the couch," she said. "It is not much, but it is better than freezing to death." The apartment was small but comfortable, with a sitting room, a tiny kitchen, and Julia's bedroom beyond. Isaac had never been upstairs before, and he was struck by how much the space reflected Julia herself: neat, practical, but with small touches of beauty in the form of embroidered pillows and pressed wildflowers in frames. They spent the storm-bound days playing cards, reading aloud to each other, and cooking simple meals on Julia's stove. The forced proximity could have been awkward, but instead it felt natural, as though they were rehearsing for a future they both wanted but had not yet discussed. On the second night, they sat by the window watching snow fall in thick white curtains. Julia was wrapped in a quilt, and Isaac sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "I have been thinking," Julia said, "about the store and about what I want for my future." "What have you concluded?" "That I want more than just survival. I want a life, a real life with someone I love." She turned to look at him. "I want that life with you, Isaac, if you want it too." Isaac set down his coffee cup and took her hands in his. "Julia Voss, I want nothing more than to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep beside you every night. I want to help you run the store and make this apartment a home. I want everything with you." "Is that a proposal?" "It is if you want it to be. I do not have a ring yet, and this is not exactly the romantic setting I had imagined, but I love you and I want to marry you." "So yes, Julia, will you marry me?" Julia's answer was to kiss him, deep and sure, with none of the hesitation that had marked their earlier kisses. When she pulled back, she was grinning. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They were married in February of 1883 in the small church in White Pine, with half the town in attendance. Julia wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and Isaac wore a new suit he had purchased specially for the occasion. Pete Morrison stood up as Isaac's best man, and the preacher's wife stood up for Julia. During the ceremony, when the preacher asked if anyone objected, there was only happy silence. When Isaac lifted Julia's veil to kiss her, his movements were slow and careful as always, and Julia smiled at him with absolute trust in her eyes. They moved into the apartment above the mercantile, and Isaac took over much of the heavy work in the store while continuing to do some work for the Connolly Ranch. Julia proved to be an excellent businesswoman, and under their joint management, the mercantile thrived. Isaac proved to be a patient and gentle husband, and Julia slowly shed the worst of her fears. The first time Julia woke from a nightmare, gasping and disoriented, Isaac did not touch her until she reached for him. He simply spoke softly, reminding her where she was and that she was safe, until she came fully awake. Then he held her while she cried, and he did not tell her to be strong or to stop dwelling on the past. He just held her and let her feel what she needed to feel. "I am sorry," she said when the tears subsided. "I thought they were getting better." "Healing is not a straight line," Isaac said. "It curves and doubles back. Some days will be harder than others, and that is all right. How did I get so lucky to find you? I think we found each other. And I think we are both lucky." As the months passed, Julia's nightmares became less frequent. She laughed more easily. She sang while she worked. She stopped checking the locks quite so obsessively, though Isaac never complained on the nights when she needed to check them twice. He understood that some habits were about control, and he would never begrudge her that. In the summer of 1883, Julia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She was thrilled at the idea of becoming a mother, but she worried constantly that her fears would somehow damage her child. Isaac reassured her as best he could. "You are the strongest person I know. You survived things that would have broken lesser people. You will be a wonderful mother. What if I flinch when the baby cries? What if I am too afraid to let them explore and take risks? Then we will work through it together. Parenting is not about being perfect. It is about doing your best and loving them fiercely, and you have so much love to give. Julia's pregnancy was difficult at times, but Isaac was endlessly patient. He rubbed her feet when they swelled, held her hair when morning sickness struck, and talked to her belly every night, telling their unborn child stories about the mountains and the desert and the stars. In March of 1884, Julia gave birth to a son. The labor was long and frightening, but when Isaac was finally allowed into the room and saw Julia holding their baby, both of them crying with relief and joy, he thought his heart might burst. "His name is Samuel," Julia said, "after my father." Isaac kissed her forehead. "Samuel Daugherty, it is perfect." Fatherhood transformed Isaac in ways he had not expected. He was protective and gentle with his son, marveling at the tiny fingers and the miniature perfection of this new life. Julia proved to be a devoted mother, though she sometimes woke in the night in a panic, needing to check that Samuel was breathing. Isaac never made her feel foolish for those fears. As Samuel grew, the apartment above the mercantile became increasingly cramped. In the spring of 1885, Isaac used their savings to purchase a small house on the edge of town. It had 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a yard where Samuel could play. Julia cried when Isaac carried her over the threshold, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming feeling that she had somehow stumbled into a life better than she had ever imagined possible. They moved the mercantile to a new location on the ground floor of a building closer to the center of town, which allowed them to expand the inventory. Business flourished. Isaac's reputation as an honest and hard-working man spread, and the Connolly Ranch offered him a partnership in a new venture raising horses. He accepted, and suddenly they had not just security but prosperity. Samuel grew into a bright and curious child with his mother's eyes and his father's dark hair. When he was 2 years old, Julia became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the winter of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter they named Alina, after Isaac's mother. Life settled into a rhythm that felt miraculous to Julia. She had a husband who loved her without reservation, 2 healthy children, a successful business, and a home filled with warmth and laughter. The nightmares still came occasionally, but they were fewer and farther between. She no longer flinched at sudden movements, though she still appreciated Isaac's careful way of moving through the world. One evening in the summer of 1888, after the children were asleep, Julia and Isaac sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set behind the mountains. Isaac had his arm around her shoulders and Julia leaned into his warmth. "You remember the first day you came into the store?" Julia asked. "I remember. You dropped the coffee beans and looked like you wanted to disappear. I was so ashamed. I thought you would think I was broken." Isaac turned to look at her. "And now I think I was broken, but you helped me heal. You gave me time and patience and love, and somehow that was enough to put the pieces back together." Julia smiled. "Not the same as before. Better, actually. Stronger in the broken places." "You did the healing yourself, Julia. I just gave you a safe space to do it in." "That is more than anyone else offered me." She kissed him softly. "You saved me, Isaac Daugherty. We saved each other." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars began to appear, one by one, until the heavens were ablaze with light. "I think my father would have liked you," Julia said. "I think he would have approved of the life we have built. I wish I could have met him, to thank him for raising such an incredible daughter. He would have said you are welcome, and then he would have given you a long lecture about treating me right." Julia laughed. even though you do not need it. Inside the house, Samuel called out for water. Julia started to get up, but Isaac stopped her. I will go. You stay here and enjoy the peace. He returned a few minutes later with 2 glasses of lemonade. Samuel wanted me to tell you good night again. I think he is stalling bedtime. He gets that from you. You always want just 5 more minutes of conversation before sleep. Can you blame me? Those are my favorite minutes of the day. They talked until the stars were brilliant overhead and the night air turned cool. They talked about their children's futures, about expanding the business, about traveling someday to see the ocean. They talked about all the ordinary, extraordinary things that made up a life well lived. When they finally went inside, Isaac locked the doors and checked the windows, rituals that brought Julia comfort. In their bedroom, as they prepared for sleep, Julia watched her husband move around the space with that same careful deliberation he had shown from the first day. It was simply part of who he was now, this awareness of her needs and comfort. Isaac, she said as they settled into bed. Yes. I am happy, truly, completely happy. I wanted you to know that. He pulled her close and she fit perfectly against his side. I am happy too. Every single day with you is a gift. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. Samuel started school and proved to have his mother's head for numbers. Eleanor grew into a spirited child who loved horses and convinced her father to teach her to ride almost before she could walk. The mercantile expanded again, and Isaac's horse breeding operation became known throughout the territory. In 1890, Julia became pregnant for a 3rd time. At 31, she worried that she was getting too old for childbirth, but Isaac reassured her and the doctor confirmed she was healthy. That December, she gave birth to twin boys, Jacob and James, who came into the world squalling and red-faced and perfect. The house was chaos for a while, full of crying babies and exhausted parents and older children trying to help. But it was joyful chaos, the kind that came from a family overflowing with love. One afternoon, when the twins were about 6 months old, Julia stood in the mercantile looking at a young woman who had just moved to town with her new husband. The woman had a bruise on her arm that her sleeve did not quite cover, and when her husband came into the store, she had tensed in a way Julia recognized all too well. After the couple left, Julia stood staring at the door for a long moment. Then she locked up the store and walked home, where she found Isaac in the yard teaching Samuel and Eleanor how to properly brush down a horse. "Can we talk?" she asked. Isaac saw something in her face and immediately handed the brush to Samuel. "You two finish up here. Your mother needs me." Inside, Julia told him about the young woman and her suspicions. "I want to help her," she said. "I want to offer her a safe place if she needs it, but I do not know how without making things worse." Isaac thought for a moment. "What if you just befriend her? Invite her for tea, let her know you are someone she can trust. Sometimes just knowing there is help available makes all the difference." Julia did exactly that. She befriended the young woman, whose name was Catherine, and slowly earned her trust. When Catherine finally confessed that her husband had been hurting her, Julia offered her a room in their home. Isaac backed his wife completely, even when Catherine's husband came looking for her, and had to be forcibly removed from their property by the sheriff. Catherine stayed with them for 2 months while she figured out how to build a new life. Julia helped her find work and a place to live. And when Catherine finally moved into her own small room above the bakery, she hugged Julia fiercely. "You saved my life," Catherine said. "No," Julia replied. "You saved your own life by having the courage to leave. I just gave you a safe place to land." After that, Julia made a point of watching for women who might need help. She never pushed, never pried, but she made sure they knew she was there. Over the years, She helped several women escape dangerous situations, and Isaac supported her every time, even when it meant confronting angry men or dealing with town gossip. "Why do you do this?" one of the ranch hands asked Isaac once. "It just brings trouble to your doorstep." "Because my wife understands what it means to be afraid and powerless," Isaac replied. "And because no woman should have to endure what she endured. If we can help even one person escape that kind of hell, it is worth any trouble it brings." The children grew. Samuel became fascinated with law and began studying with the town lawyer. Eleanor proved to be a natural with horses and worked alongside her father in the breeding operation. The twins were inseparable, always getting into mischief together and charming their way out of trouble. In 1895, when Julia was 36 and Isaac was 39, their youngest child was born, a daughter they named Grace. She was small and delicate, with auburn hair like her mother and a temperament so sweet that she became the darling of the entire family. By then, Julia had gone years without nightmares. She no longer checked locks obsessively or startled at sudden noises. She had made peace with her past, not by forgetting it but by building a present so full of love that the past no longer had the power to define her. One evening in the fall of 1897, the entire family gathered around the dinner table in their expanded home. Samuel, now 13, was talking about his plans to study law. Eleanor, 11, was describing a difficult horse she was training. The twins, 7, were arguing good-naturedly about something inconsequential. And Grace, 2, was more interested in throwing food than eating it. Julia looked around the table at these people she loved beyond measure, and then her eyes met Isaac's. He smiled at her, that gentle smile that had first made her think she might be able to trust again, and she smiled back. After dinner, while the older children cleaned up and Isaac put Grace to bed, Julia stepped outside onto the porch. The Nevada sky was doing that thing it did in autumn, turning shades of orange and pink and purple that seemed impossible. She thought about the woman she had been 14 years ago, so broken and afraid that a simple wave had made her cower. She thought about the man who had seen that fear and responded not with impatience or judgment but with patience and understanding, who had learned to move slowly around her, to telegraph his intentions, to give her time and space to heal, who had loved her not despite her brokenness but through it, until the broken places had grown strong. Isaac came out and stood beside her, his presence solid and comforting. Grace went down without a fight for once. Miracles do happen. Julia leaned against him. "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been? If you had not walked into the mercantile that day, if you had not been patient with me, I think about it sometimes, and I am grateful every day that things happened the way they did. I never thanked you properly. For what? For seeing me when I was at my worst and choosing to stay anyway, for teaching me that love could be gentle, for giving me time to heal." Julia turned to face him fully. "For learning to move slowly around me until I was ready to move toward you." Isaac cupped her face in his hands, his touch still as careful and gentle as it had been that first day. "Julia, loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. You never needed to thank me for that." He kissed her then, and it was full of all the years they had shared and all the years still to come. Inside the house, they could hear their children laughing and arguing, the sounds of a life fully lived. When they pulled apart, Julia said, "I want to tell you something I have never said before." "What is that?" "I am not afraid anymore. Not of the memories, not of the future, not of anything, because whatever comes I know I will face it with you beside me, and that makes me feel invincible." Isaac's eyes were bright with emotion. "You are invincible, Julia. You always have been. You just needed to remember it. They stood on the porch as the sky darkened and the stars emerged, their arms around each other, their hearts at peace. The Wild West was changing, becoming more civilized with each passing year, but some things remained timeless. Love, trust, the healing power of patience and gentleness. Inside, Grace started crying, and Alina called out that she needed help with her homework, and the twins were probably doing something they should not be doing. Normal life, with all its beautiful chaos. Julia and Isaac went back inside together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the evening brought. Ready to face whatever life brought. Because they had learned something vital in their years together. That two broken people could heal each other, that love could be gentle and still be fierce, and that the most profound strength was sometimes found in moving slowly, with care, with intention, with respect. That night, after all the children were finally in bed, after the house was quiet and the doors were locked, Julia and Isaac lay in their bed talking quietly about the day and making plans for tomorrow. It was their ritual, these last minutes before sleep, these moments of connection and peace. "Do you remember what you promised me the night of the harvest dance?" Julia asked. "The first dance, which promise, I made you several. You said every kiss, every touch, every moment between us would always be my choice. I remember, and I have kept that promise. You have." Every single day. Julia rolled over to face him in the darkness. "But I want you to know that it is not a choice anymore. It is a joy. It is a privilege. It is the easiest, most natural thing in the world to choose you, again and again." Isaac pulled her close, and she went willingly, eagerly, fitting perfectly against him as she had for nearly 15 years. "I choose you too," he whispered against her hair. "Every day for the rest of my life." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. A cowboy who had learned to move slowly, and a woman who had learned to trust again. A love story written in patience and gentleness, in careful movements and deliberate choices, in the slow building of a life so beautiful it eclipsed every shadow that had come before. Outside, the Nevada night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead like promises. Inside, a family slept peacefully, safe and loved and whole. And in the morning they would wake to a new day full of ordinary miracles, the kind that came from choosing love over fear, gentleness over force, patience over haste. The kind that came from a man who learned to move slowly around a frightened woman, and a woman who learned that not all men were to be feared. The kind that came from trust built carefully, day by day, moment by moment, until it became unshakable. The kind of love that healed and endured and transformed everything it touched. And if someone had asked Julia Voss Daugherty in that moment if she believed in happy endings, she would have said yes, absolutely yes. Because she was living in one, had been living in one since the day a patient cowboy had raised his hand slowly to wave and taught her that gentleness was not weakness but strength. That was how their story ended and began, over and over, every single day, with patience, with love, with the unshakable certainty that they had found in each other something rare and precious and worth every moment of the journey. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow and thrive. Samuel became a lawyer and returned to White Pine to practice, carrying on his mother's legacy of helping those who had no voice. Alina took over the horse breeding operation and expanded it beyond anything Isaac had imagined. The twins went into business together, opening a second mercantile in a neighboring town. And Grace, sweet Grace, became a teacher, shaping young minds with patience and kindness. Julia and Isaac became grandparents and then great-grandparents, surrounded always by family and love. They never left White Pine, never wanted to. Everything they needed was right there, in the town where they had found each other, in the community they had helped build. When Isaac was 72 and Julia was 69, they sat on that same porch where they had spent so many evenings, watching another Nevada sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Their hair was gray now, their faces lined with the evidence of years well lived, but their hands were still clasped together as they had been for nearly 50 years. "You have any regrets?" Julia asked. Isaac thought about it seriously, because Julia deserved a serious answer. "Not a single one. Every choice I made led me here to this life. I would not change anything. Not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts. They taught us what we were capable of surviving. They made the good parts even sweeter." Julia nodded, satisfied. "Good. Because I would not change anything either." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, one by one, until the sky was full of light. And when they finally went inside, Isaac still moved with that same careful deliberation that had defined their life together. Still telegraphing his movements, still respecting her space, still treating her with the same gentle patience he had shown that very first day. Because that was love. Not the fireworks and passion, though they had known plenty of that. But the daily choice to be gentle, to be patient, to move through the world in a way that made your partner feel safe and cherished and whole. That was the lesson they had learned together and taught to their children and grandchildren. That was the legacy they would leave behind. A love built on patience, sustained by gentleness, and made eternal by the simple act of choosing each other every day for a lifetime. And in the end, when their time on earth was done and their souls rose to join the stars that Julia's father had spoken of so long ago, they rose together, hand in hand, moving slowly through eternity the way they had moved through life, with love, with patience, with grace, together. Always together, the end.